welcome back from Top of the Wall. My name is Mason Knopp, your favorite Mason, and we're talking today about Mill and Burn, two very similar archetypes. So let's move on to some definitions. Burn, a strategy utilizing a series of spells with high damage to cost ratio to remove players from the game, seldom dedicated as removal. While on the other hand, Mill, a strategy utilizing a series of cards with a high mill to cost ratio to remove players from the game, seldom dedicated as removal. Each of these definitions exclude a lot of outliers with different playstyles and use similar cards to perform very different functions. For instance, combo decks and control decks with finishers that burn or mill an opponent out don't count as burn or mill decks. Finishers are usually something you want the smallest number of possible. Finishers are the easiest cards to replace in these control and combo decks. They have the narrowest window of opportunity to use and synergize with the rest of the deck the least. There's no reason to define a strategy by such a small aspect of it. These definitions also subtly include intention as part of the definition. The phrase "to remove players from the game" implies that the series of cards mentioned beforehand is directly harmful to an opponent. So the cards are meant to be directly harmful to a player and directly responsible for removing a player. This also excludes Dredge as a mill deck. All of the cards that it's using to mill itself over are actually being helpful towards a player. They are helping themselves and improving their chances of winning. This also excludes a lot of different control decks that splash red so that way they can get access to cheap removal spells like Lightning Bolt or Shock. These burn spells are primarily being used as removal spells. Their secondary function, if at all, is to target a player. There are quite a number of cards that have been in either mill or burn decks over the years. Just different formats, dozens of different cards, hundreds. I would like to just look at a dozen commonly used ones right now. Mind Sculpt to Searing Spear, Hedron Crab to Goblin Guide, Thought Scour to Needle Drop, Curse of Tome to Curse of the Pierced Heart, Dream Twist to Firebolt, Archive Trap to Fire Blast. There is a very clear difference in potency just looking at these first dozen cards, and we can go on and on about it, but the fact of the matter is that a player's deck starting is 53 cards, 53.5 on average if you account for mulligans, because usually most games people try to start with 6 or 7 cards. So each point of life is equal to 2.675 cards that need to be milled for those to be even. That should be the ratio, 1 to 2.675. Lightning Bolt is a gold standard in every Eternal Burn deck, and it has a dozen or more variations that require very little setup for them. Things like Lava Spike, Chain Lightning, Shard Volley. There's no 1-mana spell for mill decks that mill 8 cards without a lot of setup. While every burn deck is trying to play 12 or more Lightning Bolts, as many as they can possibly cast. There are a lot of similarities between burn and mill. They both like having good ratios, they both like being fast, they both like having low interaction instead having a ton of potency and just going straight for it. They like having a lot of redundancy. The differences are few but profound. Burn has some incidental life gain hate, while Mill has incidental graveyard hate. But Burn has better access to creatures. Creatures that have a low cost to damage ratio. That's easier to get than it is with creatures that have a good mill to cost ratio. So Burn ultimately has that better card pool for creatures, in addition to having just a simply more potent instant or sorcery like Lightning Bolt. And many of their spells double as incidental creature hate when they absolutely need it. Burn is often playing a more proactive game, while Mill is often playing a more reactive game. There's another way to compare these a little bit better that'll help us understand Magic the Gathering as a whole a little bit better. APM, AMS, and IWT. With APM, it stands for actual paid mana. It's the mana that you actually spent on something. Think of it like Street Wraith and Gitaxian Probe. You don't pay 5 mana for Street Wraith. You don't pay 1 blue mana for Gitaxian Probe. You pay 2 life. The whole point of those cards being in your deck pretty much all the time is to either lower your life or because they're free. That includes things like kickers if you're continuously planning on paying the kicker every single time. It includes the flashback if you're planning on paying the flashback every single time. It includes all of this. Those are the actual amounts of mana that you're paying. Force of Will is another great example. A lot of decks that have Force of Will in them don't cast Force of Will for its mana cost that often. They don't usually plan on it. They don't usually plan on having the mana for it. If you're not planning on paying its mana cost, then why are you counting its mana cost in your plan? AMS is average mana spent. It is the average cost amongst your cards. You can think of it as like the average converted mana cost, but you know what you're actually paying. It's like the average APM. That's exactly what it is. It's the average of what you're actually spending on. One example that is good to think about when you're thinking about AMS is Emrakul. Nobody really plans on paying the cost of Emrakul. They plan on paying for the cards that put Emrakul into play. They only really pay for her mana cost when they're going infinite or when they have a Chandelabra and can produce way too much mana. A good example of this is Reanimator. Reanimator very frequently will try to win the game on turn 1 or turn 2 because of the AMS being so low. Think about it like this. Faithless Looting is 1, Reanimator is 1, Lotus Petal 0. Sure, Gristlebrand is 8. But what do you actually pay for Gristlebrand in the Reanimator deck? What was that? I couldn't hear you. Did you say you pay 0 for Gristlebrand in the Reanimator deck? You pay nothing for him. You entomb Gristlebrand for 1, and then you reanimate him for 1, and you do not pay that 8 mana. You do not pay mana for Gristlebrand.
Uncle Grizz pays coach prices for first class.
IWT stands for Intended Win Turn. It is the turn that you plan on winning the game. The turn that your deck has usually the best chances of winning the game. Like a lot of times, Storm tries to win turn 2. Or if it gets lucky on turn 1. Control decks try to win the game much, much later. Sometimes they don't really plan on winning until maybe turn like 9, 10, really late. But by that point, the game has already been locked up for a few turns. Their finisher just needs to run out the opponent's clock. I'm not going to be listing off the actual paid mana for every single card because they're pretty obvious. Like Scare the Critics is very clearly 1 mana. You're actually gonna pay the 1 mana most of the time, and you're gonna pay 0 mana for Fire Blast most of the time, and 0 mana for Archive Trap most of the time. I'm not gonna be going through those, but I will talk about the AMS. The AMS for Burn is 1. It's 1. They have a ton of lightning bolts that are 1, and the cards that are higher are usually far and few in between. Plus, there's like 19 lands in there. A lot of times, it's less than 1. I'm being very liberal with that 1 here. Like 1's kind of high for a burn deck. Well, the AMS for a mill deck, a lot of times is much closer to 2. It's very frequently double. That is a very bad sign for decks that are playing a very go for the throat kind of game. It's very rough. The intended win turn of Burn is usually 3. A lot of times they try to win on 3. Usually if there's not a whole lot of resistance from the opponent, they get them on 3. They get them on 3 like game 1. They do a pretty good job of that. Mill, on the other hand, a lot of times they see a win on turn 5. Significantly slower. If they see a win at all. That's why Burn is a tier 1 competitive deck and Mill is a tier 2 competitive deck. There's a whole lot of other reasons I'm sure that people can nitpick and come up with a million and one other reasons for it. But these are just the biggest ones. And quick, before you go, I am on TikTok now. I am doing a video series. Just a quick daily pick-me-up of Magic the Gathering stuff. Just your daily synergy or combo. Getting something that you didn't know about a card beforehand or didn't know that a card existed. Digging deep for some older synergies and some newer. Some from formats that you probably don't play or might not have heard of that are popular. And it'll hopefully help you improve your Magic game and just give you something neat to scroll through on TikTok. It is called Daily Synergy Juice. That's all. Coming in for that face touch.
Go tell some people about Uncle Grizz. Don't explain it. That's enough class for now. Go tell some people about Uncle Grizz. No.